Remember
Everyone
my
knows it's not
grandchildren?
morning. We used to have all those years at 10 o'clock in the
Yeah.
morning. Good afternoon. Okay, it's afternoon, it's 2 o'clock.
It's morning somewhere.
It's morning somewhere, that's for sure. Okay, but not here. A little bit, all right. Okay, so the book is Hotline by Dimitri Nasrallah. How many read the book?
My name's on the list.
Oh, was it really? It was hard to get? It was really.
Well, I don't know if it's hard to get or not, but I didn't get it yet.
It's on the, I think there are 26 people
I
I
think
the Mount Sinai literally.
Oh, we're also doing like around now? Okay, so, all right.
I think the Mount Sinai Literary Club is also.
Oh, maybe that's the reason, because I didn't get it.
Because I know it was part of the, like, the library had the program Canada Reads.
Yeah, it won our Canada Reads,
Oh, did it?
but it did not in Canada Reads.
Oh, it's one of the Canada Reads.
Yeah, yes.
I listened to Canada Reads, I heard all those books, they didn't sound very interesting.
Which one won? The one with the ducks?
Ducks won by Kate Beaton, a graphic novel.
Oh, okay, right, you were talking
Defended
about
by
that.
Danielle here at the library.
Yes, right. Did you do Hotline? Were you defending?
No, I did Mexican Gothic.
Okay.
No, Jennifer Eisman did Hotline.
I was listening to Canada Reads like on the TV, like, but they didn't sound very interesting. Were they interesting?
I liked this one.
Oh, okay.
This one, okay, so only one, none of us other read it. Well, anyways, I'll do it, and if you get hold of it, it's a very quick, it's an easy read. It's 270-ish pages, but small and very easy to read. I hadn't read anything by this author till now. I don't know, has anybody read his previous? No. It's his fourth novel, and it's a novel. It's definitely fiction. It's not a memoir, except that, and it's got the little a novel somewhere on here. I like when they put it on just so you shouldn't think that it's nonfiction. But it turns out that the story is based on his own experiences, and that makes it, I think, very interesting. I don't know if I'm so inspired to read his previous books, but this one is really, it's an interesting look at the immigrant experience to Montreal, and relatively recent. So what immigrant experience is he writing about here? He sets it 1986, 1987, which is for us relatively recent. I mean, we can remember, it's not ancient history for most of us. And it's told from the point of view of a Lebanese immigrant. And we remember when there was the civil war in Lebanon, started in the 70s, and a terrible situation in the country, and I don't know, politics there is very complicated, but it was different militia groups fighting each other. It was Christians versus Muslims and different factions within. Again, the Middle East is always very, very complicated, but it was a terrible time. And people who had the financial means or the connections or an ability to leave and the desire to, most of them did. And many came, if you'll remember probably, to Montreal because, especially those who spoke French. But that was the situation, and those were the immigrants who were encouraged, I guess, as same thing now, if you have French, you're put up higher on the list of getting your application accepted. So he came as a young child. He was born, Dimitri Nasrallah was born in 1977, which makes him 46 now. Yeah, 40, pardon? Yeah, he said that he was 8 years old when they came here. He was even younger, no, he was 11 years old when he came here, but he was younger when they left Lebanon with his family. So he and his family left Lebanon. They went to Cyprus, to Greece, to Cyprus to do Dubai, and then they were finally granted their immigrants visas to come here. And they came to Montreal. It sounds like he made reference in a couple of the interviews that I listened to him talk with, that his parents lived north of Toronto, and he moved back to Montreal. So he lives here, but his parents, and he has one sister who he mentioned, I don't know where she lives, and he teaches at Concordia. He's a professor or a lecturer at Concordia. He's an editor, he writes, he publishes anthologies, and he edits collections of work. And this is his fourth novel. So he said that, and interesting how an author takes, as in this case, and from what it sounds like, he's been taking that experience and basing his different pieces of writing on what the experience that he had of coming to Montreal with his family. So he writes in one of the interviews, he said, "I remember it as the single worst year of my life." This is how Dimitri Nasrallah recalls the winter of 1986-1987. He and his family had escaped civil war Lebanon and spent a reasonably, as he described it, comfortable period of time in Greece. And then the Nasrallah family, 11-year-old Dimitri, his younger sister, and their parents found themselves in a small one-bedroom apartment on University Street in the McGill ghetto. So just as in the book, the character, that's where the mother, the young mother with her young son, is living in the McGill ghetto. And as he recalls it, the author, he said, it was a city utterly unlike any place that he and his family had ever experienced, not like Greece, not like Cyprus, Dubai. They were in the Middle East still. And they come here, and it's the late fall, the eve of a Montreal winter, and apparently, I don't remember that many years back, but apparently that winter, 86, 87, was harsh even by our local standards. So, you can imagine what it was like for these people who came from the Middle East, where winter maybe was a little rain, and once every 4 years, maybe some snow. But they came to this winter. And he said that, so his parents, who were professionals, it sounds like the family was pretty well off in Lebanon, and they came here and they were looking for work. And his mother was a French teacher, just like the character, just like the narrator of the story is a French teacher. And she had been told, as Muna, the woman who's narrating the story, that you'll come here and you'll be able to find work because French teachers, you know, this is Quebec and you speak French and you're a trained professional with experience, no problem. His mother was not, this was not true, because I don't know what the situation is today, but back in 1986, Lebanese immigrants with a different accent were not hired to teach in the local French schools. I don't know if it's still the same today, but that was very much the experience of the Nasrallah family and the mother, who kept trying and was like quite taken aback, as Dimitri recalls, that my mother expected to find work. I mean, that was the whole reason we came to Montreal, because she was going to find work. And my father, I'm not sure what his profession was, and the only thing she could find was a job in phone sales at a weight loss center. So that was true. So the story, and the novel is, the narrator of the story is this young woman, Muna, who comes with her young son, Omar, to Montreal. She's fleeing the civil war in Lebanon, and she's either helped or pushed out, depending how you look at it, by her in-laws after her husband was kidnapped during the war and presumed dead. So she's a young widow with this son who's come to Montreal the same way as the Nasrallah family came, because the mother thought that she would find work as a French teacher. And just as Nasrallah's mother in real life could not find, and the only job she found was in telephone sales for a weight loss center, same thing, this is the narrator of the story, that's what she comes to realize that nobody, after months of trying to get a teaching job, interview after interview, and realizing then they're not gonna hire me because I don't speak the same kind of French, and I've gotta find something, and my money is running out, and I'm here with my child, and I need to pay the rent. And she answers an ad, and that's the opening scene in the book, that Muna answers an ad that she's seen in the paper. And remember, 1986, so cell phones, I'm trying to remember back, I mean, maybe they did exist, like very rudimentary ones, huge, big, I don't know, I don't remember the technology, why, because it all changed so quickly, but definitely she's making phone calls and there are phone booths and you put your quarter in the phone booth, right? Like this is like phone booth, you put a quarter, it's not even a quarter anymore, you do find one, I think it's 50 cents, I saw one somewhere in the hospital. And so in that seminal family episode with a few tweaks, most notably the downsizing of Nasrallah's family, which came as a family of 4, the parents and the 2 siblings, downsized into this story, so to a single mother and her 1 son. This is the basis of Hotline. Published here in Montreal by Esplanade Véhicule Press, local Montreal publishing house, where Nasrallah also serves as an editor to some of their publications. This is his 4th novel, and as I said, I haven't read the other ones, but according to the reviewers, it takes his work to a new level of sophistication, and you could call it, and I think too, I mean, a significant addition to the literary chronicling of the Montreal immigrant experience. He says, what got my parents into Quebec were their French skills, and what moved them ahead in the line was my mom being a French teacher and supposedly being able to use those skills here. And then when she got here, nobody would hire her because who's going to hire an immigrant to teach French in Quebec? They don't tell you that when you're applying. So you come here under false pretenses with these hopes of a new life, and then you get here and it's not all so rosy. And if you remember too, 1986, the time that this mother and son, as the Nasrallah family themselves, arrived in Quebec was a time of political and cultural ferment. Isn't it always
I was gonna say.
ferment? I mean, plus ça change, doesn't really, okay. But they are ill-equipped to understand. I mean, they're coming from the kind of ferment that is war and violence and killing and hiding out in basements, and grenades and bombs and missiles are exploding above and people are being killed and kidnapped and shot. So the political thing about whether, French language is getting enough, like, that seems so insignificant and petty and minor in the scheme of things to these immigrants, but that's what they come to in Quebec. And he does it, he really, I thought, very skillfully worked that situation. There's no, not proselytizing, but there's nothing dogmatic about the story. He said, Nasrallah, the author, I did not want to make this a sovereignty or anti-sovereignty novel. It seems to me that there are enough of those in the French, Quebecois literary scene, because a lot of the fiction that you read about Montreal over the last number of decades comes down to this question of the 2 solitudes. But there was another side, and the situation was not on the radar of these immigrants until they ended up being in the middle of it, because I guess you could say in the middle of it, because Muna is a French teacher, and if she was going to Europe and looking for a job, she would be hired if she was a good teacher and they were looking for teachers and she spoke French. But in Quebec, not, because her French was not Quebecois French. So it was a tricky thing that he managed to do, which was just describe the experience of this young single mother and her son as they come here all alone, and her money is running out and she has to figure out how to take care of herself and her son, and winter is coming, and winter is a big factor. as it is to us every single year, even those of us, and she has a line in the book where when Muna works at this weight loss center, and it turns out that she becomes very good at this job because, and I thought that was a skillful thing that the author did in the book, because, you know, when he opens his story with Muna, this going and applying for this job at this weight loss clinic, and I think instinctively as a reader, you're thinking, oh my gosh, weight loss clinics, like this is gonna be a disaster. She's not gonna get the job, or she's not gonna, how can you make sales? She's not gonna be able to manage. And then, you know, after a few days, she's not gonna even have a paycheck, and what's gonna happen, and it's getting cold, and her kid, and she and her, they need winter clothes. Like, what do they know about how you need to dress in Montreal in the winter? This isn't Beirut where you could get away with a, you know, a light down jacket. This is, yeah, as he describes in the book, like winter, it's really good. What is that song? The famous song, Mon pays c'est l'hiver. So this is really, I think this could be the byline of this book, is Mon pays c'est l'hiver. And the book opens and it's late fall and winter is coming, and we, the readers, especially those of us who live in Montreal, know what's going to be coming. Muna, she doesn't know what she's headed for. Never mind, you know, that she's looking, I mean, she has serious concerns about she needs to have a paycheck every 2 weeks in order to be able to pay the rent and to buy food for her son. So this is when they're coming. But he says specifically, I did not want to make this. This is not about that. But the issue is there. And it's a very honest, I thought, a very honest and very realistic and very easy to read. I mean, I'll tell you, you get this book and you'll read it. It's very quick. There's no pyrotechnics in the language. The language is very plain. Not that it's not well written, it is, but it's, to me, was a pleasure to read because there was nothing difficult to read in it. You read the story of this woman, and it's, you know, you're getting right into her and into her hopes and her dreams and her struggles with trying to deal with this situation in her life. Immigration is a very difficult thing, no matter when and where. Of course, different circumstances, there are much more challenging ways and much more challenging situations. But even if you come with money, and even if you come with language, the idea of leaving your country where you've grown up, where your family is, where you know the culture, and moving to another place is never going to be easy. For the little boy, for Omar, the challenge plays out most starkly at school. His mother, Huna, her challenge is, how do I make enough money to be able to rent and food and clothing? And clothing, not what's stylish or fun. It's the serious business of enough kind of winter clothes so as not to freeze. And she realizes this as winter sets in, and they're standing outside at the bus stop, and it's late fall and the weather is getting colder, and she's realizing that her son does not have warm enough clothing, and she also doesn't have warm enough clothing. And there are those scenes of where she works downtown, and they live downtown in the student ghetto. So she tries to be underground as much as she can. You know, there's the reference to Montreal's underground city, where she goes, takes the metro, goes underground, and doesn't resurface until she has to, which is what people do during the winter. So that her challenge is how to support herself and her son. But for a young kid, his challenge is school, and school is a challenge anyway for kids. But imagine, and this is always, you know, the kid who comes from a different culture and doesn't have the language. And it turns out the language, so whereas Muna, and this is the same as the author himself, his mother spoke French well enough to be a French teacher, but the author says, he did not speak French. He spoke Arabic and he knew English. And that was it. So when he came here, he too had to go into a classe d'accueil, and he had to learn French, and he was not doing so well. And there was talk, and they held him back a year because he didn't do well in his classe d'accueil. And in the novel, the same thing happened. There's a scene, a very well described scene, when Muna is called in, her son Omar's French teacher calls up or sends her a message. I would like to talk to you. And she has to go in and have a meeting with Monsieur Pierre Gagnon, the teacher who's telling her, you know, I don't know, your son, like, it doesn't seem like he's doing very well, he's not very communicative, and is he getting enough stimulation at home? Are you? And she says to him, well, I'm a French teacher, and he says, oh, French teacher, he's very impressed. And she says, yes, well, but I couldn't get a job here, and he says, well, but the son doesn't speak French the same way as the author, just because his mother spoke French and taught it. He didn't speak French, and it was a very, very, as he said, I remember it as the single worst year of my life. And as a child, these years are very, they stay with you. The memories and don't lightly want to use the word trauma, but the feelings of struggles and of negativity remain with us into adulthood. So clearly it remained with the author because it became so much part of him that he was finally able to write a book about this. So he said, I remember my personal situation, the author was saying, there was this inconvenience that I seemed to pose for my French teachers, especially, he recalled. It made me so unconfident in my French that I ended up having a very negative relationship with the language that stayed with me for a long time. So I thought, now that's interesting, because obviously his parents moved to Toronto. I don't know the timeline of what happened, but he came back and he lives in Verdun and he teaches at Concordia. And he says, so writing about Omar's situation in my novel was a chance to reflect on that all these years later. Now that I live in Montreal again, and I use French for a good chunk of my life, it's fine. But it certainly was not encouraged, and I did not have an easy time with it back when I was a young child. The heart of the book, however, is the mother. The novel is written in Muna's first person. He takes on a first person narrative voice, which again, okay, I mean, I guess it shouldn't make a difference if an author is good enough, whether it's the same gender or not, but he's writing from the mother's point of view. And he really does pull it off with flair. And it's that interesting choice, I think, that he didn't choose to write it from Omar's point of view. He could have written it from the little boy's point of view, and that would have been, more autobiographical, or at least it could have been, you'd say maybe that was the stronger basis for what could have been a different kind of story, but he doesn't. He chooses to write it from the mother's perspective. And it turns out, I think, that gives the book its emotional heft, because if he would be writing from this young boy's perspective, like, okay, it would have been his own perspective, with years of maturity and reflection behind it. But still, if he was going to make it honestly an 8 or 9 or 10 or however old young boy's voice, it could only have a certain amount of emotional maturity, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. If you're writing from an 8-year-old's point of view, you can only be an 8-year-old and understand the world through your 8-year-old eyes. But he chose to tell it through the mother's eyes, because then he's telling it through a 28-year-old woman. I think she said she was 20 when she had, at least in the story, had her son. So at least still a young woman, but definitely more mature than the 8-year-old. The mother-son relationship is drawn, and it really comes off with an especially nuanced assurance. And every scene of their relationship and the conflicts, the love, but the conflicts, seems to ring true. He said, and this is so interesting, he said, it was strangely freeing for me to write in that voice. And I felt that, you know what, if I could embody the voices of 2 imaginary dictators in a fictionalized country, which were the protagonists of his 2018 novel called The Bleeds, Bleeds, I haven't read, but it was apparently 2 imaginary dictators in a fictionalized country. That's what he wrote about. So he said, if I could write like that, or think that I could pull that off, then, and have people feel somewhat convinced by that, then I should be able to handle my own mother, he said. But not so simple, right? Easier to handle fictionalized dictators' voices in fictionalized countries than your own mother. Not so easy. He says, so you know what I did? I realized this was in another interview I was listening to. He said, what I do is I work through my issues. It's my therapy in my books. And so here I am, a man, you know, in my mid-40s, I'm finally able to write about my relationship with my mother. So he says, and it really speaks to the malleability of identity, and given the hardships that a lot of people face as immigrants, you know, there's an element of wanting to reinvent yourself. Like, yes, the character comes, as did his mother, wanting to be a French teacher, because that's what she was. She was a French teacher. And throughout the book, Muna says, you know, I'm a French teacher. I happen to be working in this call center, selling weight loss meals, but really I'm a French teacher. And her passion, and she tells us in the book, I went to university, I studied, I got my degree as a teacher while the civil war was going on in Lebanon and the bombs were falling around us. And my mother-in-law, who, as she's saying, that she describes briefly, she marries her husband, and her husband's family did not want him to marry her because they are a wealthier family, and they had their eyes set on another girl from a wealthier family for their son. But their son falls in love with Muna, and they get married. But being a French teacher, being a teacher, she's a passionate teacher. And here she comes, and she has to take this job. So maybe she's going to reinvent herself. She said, and he says, you know, I find that it's quite refreshing for a person to be able to do that several times over in a lifetime. To feel that maybe you can close one chapter and open up another one. And in this case, Muna's a young woman. She's only 28 years old. It's not like she's coming as a 50-something-year-old who's like, it's already a little bit maybe late to change careers if you're changing countries and you have to go back to school. And even a slight name change can really affect a person's outlook. And he puts that into the story, because by the end of the story, so Muna is Muna, M-U-N-A, but when she gets this job at this weight loss center, she goes, and I'll just read you a little bit from the opening since most of you haven't read the book. The book is divided into three sections. So the first section is called No Experience Necessary, which, you know, when they put in want ads, job ad, that the kinds of jobs where no experience necessary, we'll train you on the job. The second and the longest part of the book is called Here the Nights Are Endless. Guess what that's about? That's when winter sets in and Muna is having to figure out how to deal with winter. And the third and the last chapter is the shortest one, and that's the one in which he introduces a sense of hope. And this is I thought also an interesting aspect to this book. He calls this one, What We Bury Lives On and On, meaning our memories and our experiences, no matter how we bury it, I mean, there is something actual that happens in the story that's buried and comes to light. But then all the things that we keep within ourselves that we bury, they still live on and on in who we become. So the opening, the No Experience Necessary section of the book, how does he begin? At 2:05, I check my face in the mirrored walls of the building's lobby, straighten my blazer, touch up my lipstick, and then board the elevator to the 6th floor. I've been through this process many times now. I'm always hopeful that this time will turn out differently, inshallah. And an interesting thing that he does in this book, he puts in bits of Arabic words, but he does it very cleverly and he doesn't have a glossary at the back. He doesn't put them in italics or in or in, what's the word, you know, in quotation, but in when, what's it, when the, is italics when you, slash it.
Quotation mark.
Right, okay, so it's not, it's just part of the regular text. And after a while, I mean, you could look up to see what, inshallah, we probably pretty well know, but then she, the narrator, has other words, which you get to know, and they just end up adding a flavor, like, to the story of how this woman would really be talking and would be thinking. So they don't detract, and I think it was well done that there were no quotation marks or no glossary at the end. So she says, I'm already, and this is what an upbeat, your positive attitude, this whoever this person who's talking, we don't know yet, is writing in. I'm already finding things to like about this building. The lobby is bright and well kept. There's a security desk to keep out all the Abu Rehas, which I did not look up, but I don't know what it means in Arabic, but from doing drugs in the public washroom. So we have to look up, I should look up that word. Anyways, even the elevator is a good size. So these are already little details, and this is just in the opening paragraph that this young woman has learned in her search for a job, that if the lobby looks well kept, if the elevator is a decent size, this is already a good sign that this firm is somewhat respectable, because she's probably been answered other ads, no experience necessary, with not such pleasant results. I know myself. I grow attached to the little touches like this too fast, and I begin to imagine myself anywhere and everywhere in an effort to will the world to bend my way for once. I am a dreamer. My mother always said so. The elevator's doors open at the 6th floor, where a promising white lobby and relatively clean carpeting greet me. Someone has thought to clean out the large ashtray garbage can by the elevator, so it's not the first smell to backhand you when the doors slide open. Along the walls to the right is one of those modern looking glass doors, and stenciled across it in neon red letters is the name Dimitri 4, F-O-R-T, like strong, strength, or depends on body. I step inside and announce myself to the board receptionist. Muna Haddad, I say, here for the information session. We spoke earlier. She rolls her eyes, checks her list, and then points to a room down the hall. Follow the signs for the information session and wait with the others. Help yourself to the free coffee. I hope she didn't notice that my eyebrows perk up at the mention of free coffee. I find that impressive. At the end of the hall, I step into a conference room with windows facing out over the north end of the city. And then what's also nice about this book is it's fun once in a while to read a book that's set in Montreal, because when she talks about what she sees from the window, you can see the McGill University campus and the mansions along Dr. Penfield and the names he all writes in the French version, and then Mount Royal or Mont Royal, and then this sharply dressed blonde woman walks into the room. Bon après-midi, à tout le monde, says this woman. Welcome to Nutri4's information session on an exciting new career opportunity for the right person. Tell me, how many of you would say that you're happy with your lives? Well, this is a great opening, chapter to this. So, all the people who are here, and they're men and women, because they weren't really sure, I guess, whoever applied. But this is, how many are happy with your lives? This is the introduction to Muna, who's just come here with her son, fleeing the civil war and the chaos and the violence in Lebanon, trying to find a job. And here this blonde lady says to them, how are you happy with your life? This is the sale. So, and it says this Lise Charbonneau, who's turns as the head of the sales staff, and she's doing the hiring, and she presents the product. And the product is this weight loss system where whoever signs up for this product, they send you boxes of your meals, like the meal plan comes in little boxes. So you don't have to worry about figuring out what to eat or calories or anything. You just sign up and you pick your meals, breakfast, lunch, supper, snacks too, and it gets sent to you in the mail. Remember, these 3 Amazon days, and then she explains to them, comes in unlabeled brown boxes. You can have them, you can pick them up somewhere, if you can't have it delivered to your door. So nobody knows. You shouldn't be embarrassed that this is what you're getting, this weight loss product. And so what's the job of what's the job that they're being hired here to join the sales staff, to make cold calls, and also then to follow up on people who've signed up, to check in with them every few weeks, to be their counselor and encouraging voice to see how they're doing. So really, isn't the feeling you get when this is her interview, like you think, oh, this is not good. This is not going to work out. And what he does in this book, besides describe winter and describe from a fall till late spring in the lives of this mother and her son, but he also writes a hopeful and positive, an immigrant story that ends on a hopeful and positive note, which is, as one reviewer wrote, unusual these days, because so many of the books written contemporarily will write about the immigrant experience, will write about, and definitely from a racist point of view. There was a long review in Walrus magazine about how immigrant stories are not usually hopeful because the focus is on various, prejudices and various negative. So here he has taken his experience based really on his parents, their story, but written a very hopeful novel. So it's something that is very nice to read. And when you come, and I kept the whole time, I kept thinking, so even after this opening interview, and as Muna, the woman, our narrators describing, slowly during this interview and this presentation, the candidates leave, the men all leave, and then some of the women leave when they realize that this is what's entailed in this job. And then when this woman leaves, is ending her presentation, she's describing the regional advertising campaigns that they take out in magazines and newspapers, television to bring in clients through a hotline number. The book gets its title. That's where the title Hotline comes, because Muna is working on the hotline, and that's where he takes this title. So she says, this Lise, who's introducing and interviewing and giving this presentation, she finishes by saying, those of you who are well organized will see your efforts rewarded. When people finally muster the courage to pick up the phone, to call the number, the hotline, they are automatically directed to a consultant for follow through. And that's who you will be. Those of you who will be chosen and successful. Those of you who are well organized will see your efforts rewarded, which again all sounds like the sales pitch, and who believes this? She finishes by saying, don't you ever feel there are some things in the world that you just don't want to talk about with the people in your lives? What we offer is a little window to the outside, someone our clients can confide in with information that's too sensitive to reveal in their daily interactions. Many people don't have any daily interactions at all. Our hotline is a shortcut through all those complications of daily life. On the phone, you may be filling in for a loved one, you may be a coach, or even a disciplinarian. People won't tell you what they need, but if you make it your skill to figure out what they do say, then you will be successful. I'm going to leave these information packages here. At the back, you'll find an application sheet. If you're interested, fill one out and leave it at the front desk. You can expect a call from us in the next 2 days. If you're selected, we start on Monday. And out goes this. Lise says, good afternoon, leaves the conference. And then Muna says, well, once she's safely down the hall, about half the people around the table, including all the men, gather their things and make their way out without even looking at the information packages. Some are complaining about how this is one of the scams that they hear about on TV. One woman shares the story of a friend who tried this sort of service, and it's really just about siphoning as much money as possible from those poor people looking for help. But she says, well, I can't help but being drawn to the stack of applications that Lisa's left behind. I find certain people quite magnetic, meaning this Lise, she's very taken with her. So she takes an application form and she says, do I have any choice? I'm going to apply. And apply she does, she gets the job, And as the book goes on, and it's 270 pages, she stays at the job. And contrary to what I was expecting, I didn't expect she'd get hired, or I didn't expect it would work out, or I didn't expect she'd have, I mean, the paycheck at the beginning is very, very minimal, and she's really struggling, and she's barely making it. Make her ends meet till the end of the month, or the end of the 2-week pay period. But she sticks it out, and she finds herself very good at it. And it's the way he contrasts, when you think of it, and here is Muna, come here all by herself, no one to talk to. And I thought, as I was reading it too, that she had no interest in joining. There was a Lebanese community. There was an immigrant community of others who had come from Lebanon at the time. There was a church to belong to, because, when she keeps saying inshallah, and I was thinking, is she Muslim? But she describes her wedding as being in a church, in a Maronite church. So they're Christians, or at least it seems that way. But she doesn't join anything. The apartment that she finds herself in, it seems like, was similar to the Nasrallah family's experience, where they only stayed for 1 year, because when they landed, they didn't know anything about the city of Montreal. And this apartment, and he said, my family, who had come from comfortable circumstances and went on to more comfortable circumstances, that 1 year, luckily for the Nasrallah family, was a blip in their otherwise generally comfortable circumstances. And they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, all 4 of them, in the student ghetto on University Avenue. So that's where the author sets this story. But this Muna she doesn't have anybody to help her, no one. She and her son are this little unit there in that high-rise apartment building that's really filled mainly with students. And as she describes it, it comes furnished. She gives her son the bedroom, because she says an 8-year-old boy should have a place to have where his things and his toys, and he should get the bed. She sleeps on a sagging old sofa bed in the living room that she unfolds every night, that she says, who knows how many have slept here before. But generally it's students. There's one Jewish character in the book, Mr. Saltzman. He seems to be, his family's been the owner of this apartment building, and he's portrayed as a sympathetic fellow. He sits in his office there when she comes into the building every night, watching TV, and his TV shows are All in the Family. It's interesting, like he puts a little bit of, back in time warp. But he's nice to her, and he says to her at one point, my family knows about the immigrant experience, and the way he describes it, they came over as Holocaust survivors with nothing, under much worse circumstances. So he's sympathetic to this young woman, especially because generally his tenants are students who can make a mess of the buildings, who make a lot of noise. And he senses that here's this young woman with a son, that she's going to be a good tenant. He shows her downstairs in the building where there's a storage room full of discarded items that when students move out, they're not interested, or whoever the tenants are. And he says to her, help yourself to anything you need from down here, which is very helpful for her. So he has a little bit of contact. Her co-workers, because she takes the job and she goes there every single day. She walks her son to school in the morning, and then there's the whole thing with the school that her son is having a difficult time, as did the author. There's that great scene where she's called in to have a meeting with the teacher, and she has to go because, and here she is, she still considers herself a teacher, because that's who she is, that's her identity. This salesperson for this weight loss program company, this is just what she has to do now, but she's really, really a teacher. And so this scene, where it must be a similar scene that Nasrallah or his mother had to go through. So she goes and she says to her son as they get up in the morning, she says, what's your teacher's name again? Monsieur Pierre. And she says, okay, so don't lie to me. Are you in trouble? I don't think so. No fights, no bad grades. He can't think of anything. When I ask if his teacher is meeting with the other parents too, he shrugs. I give up, take his almost finished cereal bowl over to the sink and tell him to go brush his teeth. She says, I haven't seen the inside of his school since I came here last August to enroll him. At the time, I was naive enough to worry that I might end up teaching at the same school as Omar. I wondered how he might react to me as being his teacher. I had no idea what was to come. Now, as we're walking through the halls, past lockers and classroom doors and art projects pinned to the walls, I once again feel the ache of not being a teacher. I thought I could let it go like one of the New Year's resolutions I learned about at work. Because at work, they learn all this psychology to tell you. So people will make all these New Year's resolutions. They'll be not very good over the holiday period. Here you must understand. And then in January, they're all going to feel very remorseful because they'll gain some weight. And you have to learn the psychology of what to tell your clients when you call them up and you say, Mr. So-and-so, so what did the scale say to you this month? But don't worry, we all have to like that. So she says, we arrive at the door to Omar's class and I see his teacher's name, Pierre Gagnon, and then classe d'accueil, which is the classroom all the immigrants are assigned to until they learn enough French to join the kids in the regular classes. I tap firmly. Entrez, I hear Monsieur Pierre call. We step in and Omar's teacher rises from his desk. He is a thin man with a thick mustache and wire-rimmed glasses, balding but with long hair that's tied in a braid. You can picture the type. Unlike the more formal look that I usually saw on male teachers back home, he wears sandals with fixed wool socks, a loose vest, and a beaded necklace. Welcome, Madame Haddad. Comment ça va? What a pleasure to finally meet you. He reaches out to shake my hand. Then he turns to Omar and says, Bonjour, mon grand. Would you mind giving your mama and me a few minutes to talk? Go play with your friends. Omar gives me that helpless look that I instantly read as, but I have no friends. Smiling, I nod to the door as if to say, see you later, Habibi. Once the door closes behind him, Monsieur Pierre pulls two of the kids' little chairs out and invites me to sit with him, our knees jutting up between us. You can just picture this scene. Thank you for taking the time to come down here. And of course, you have a nice classroom. On the walls above the board, there is a large blue and white Quebecois flag, as well as a series of posters labeled Nouvelle France that show European explorers planting flags on mountains and navigating rivers. I try to make learning a living activity, he says. I want to surround the kids with history and culture so they learn it for themselves. I'm sorry, I'm talking very fast. Do you understand me okay? Yes, sure, I speak fluently. I am a French teacher too. Ah, that's wonderful. I didn't know that. Where do you teach? I'm not teaching anymore. It was before we moved. When did you move here? Last August. Oh, well, bienvenue. He lets out a laugh and slaps his thigh. It's hard to get any information out of Omar. He doesn't participate. Monsieur Pierre shakes his head. I try to engage him, but most of the time he just stares out the window and waits for the day to end. Is he tired? Does he stay up too late? No, I make sure he gets to bed at 8 every night. He generally sleeps okay. I don't know if he's told you, but before we moved to Canada, he missed school for a year. In Lebanon, where we come from, there is a war. He hasn't told me anything, he says, looking surprised to be hearing what he's hearing. I think he's afraid of me. What does his father do? His father died 3 years ago, I say, trying to keep it casual, like it's something to be taken lightly. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. He turns serious. I think Omar is having a hard time with your transition. As you can imagine, I see a lot of immigrant children passing through here, a lot of lives changing, a lot of feelings, many languages. Some kids' stories are so sad. I suppose you think Omar is one of them, I say. I've been trying to shield him from it all, but I see it's not working. What I can do for them is teach them enough French and socialization skills. You know, how things are here to help them find out how they fit in. How should they fit in? Well, in Omar's case, it's how to concentrate, to be present, to communicate. I've seen him for 3 months and all the other kids in our group have made advances in that time. He's not used to going to school in French or going to school at all. Maybe he missed too much. I wonder if he shouldn't stay in the 3rd grade next year. It's already been hard for him. I had this talk with your director, Monsieur Beaupré. Yes, Monsieur Beaupré, and I don't want him to feel any more alienated from school than he already does. And they go on, and then Monsieur Gagnon, the teacher, says, well, he's gonna have to learn, maybe I work too much and too hard, but I have to make sure my students are getting along. And she says, I'm not home very much, but I have to work. I have no choice. I have to earn money. And so is he getting enough attention at home? The teacher asks. well, what's that supposed to mean? And you feel the feeling of this immigrant, this poor mother who's trying to make enough to eat and clothe and house her child. And the teacher, the French teacher, is he getting enough attention at home? Well, what is that supposed to mean? Well, you said it's just you and him. You said you work too much. Is he spending too much time alone? Is he being ignored? I can see how it might be hard for him to integrate if he sits at home alone when he comes back from school. So there's the guilt, which must have been the experience. I'm thinking of Nasrallah's, parents when they went out to do whatever jobs and the kids were home alone. So anyway, this interview was very difficult, and then it ends up by the teacher saying to her, okay, Madame and Dad, you should speak French to your son at home. Don't speak Arabic, even though it's comfortable. You want him to learn French. And they end, and she goes home and she's very discouraged. So that's the scene in the class that So you get the sense of the situation and not through anything dogmatic, as he says. I didn't want to make this a sovereignty or not. I just wanted to express the experiences that I had, or that my character had. And so the story goes on. Winter comes. There's this scene of when she decides she has to find a store. She realizes they don't have appropriate clothes for the winter when it gets very cold. So somebody tells her the good store to go where clothes are really not expensive is down. She ends up walking St. Catherine East and finds a store where she can find not very beautiful, like she says, clothes from I don't know how many years ago, but at least they're warm, and bundles them all up. And her poor son's never seen so many layers and snow pants and all kinds of it. And she too. And she says, out of all the clothes, she had to pick something that looked reasonably. And she was, nicely dressed young woman back in Lebanon. And then she realizes winter in Montreal is a whole other thing. You from here to here, all you see maybe are slits of people's pies for 6 months, and that's about it, which is so true, and apparently it was a particularly bad winter, that 86, 87. And so the story goes on. She's doing very well at her job. She realizes that she's not the only lonely person. Even the native Quebecois, or at least the ones she encounters in her job, are very lonely, and they look at her as a friendly voice in their lives. There's one man who she senses, and she knows she's not the only one who's had this issue, that maybe, because her supervisor Lee says to her, you don't want to get too personal. Therefore, you don't want to ever give them your real name. So Muna becomes Mona. Very interesting, just change one letter. So when she introduces herself, when she makes her call, answers the phone, bonjour, hello, this is Mona from da-da-da. And so she is this anonymous, unknown voice to these people, but really a lifeline to them. And it's sort of interesting that she, the immigrant who's coming here, struggling, trying to make a new life for her and her son, really living very precariously, is being a support to these other people who she's never met. So the way he writes it, it turns out that it happens that yes, his mother did do exactly this kind of work, but it makes for a very good premise and way of writing this story. But as I said, it's not a pessimistic or depressing book. It's realistic. Throughout the book, she also, we're in Muna's head and in her imaginary life, and she is trying to keep her husband, the memories of her husband alive. She imagines herself talking to him. She imagines herself, being with him and lying with him in bed at night. And she tries so hard to keep him with her as the months go on. But this is very much part of it. She tries to make her son remember his father a little bit. They have one carved wooden horse. That's what they brought with them from Lebanon. It sits there in the middle of the table in this otherwise totally impersonal apartment, which doesn't really have their stuff because it's a furnished apartment with all the things that other people had used. But by the end of the book, she has gotten a little bit back of her old identity, because it turns out that her son finally, the phone rings one day and there's a boy on the other line, and he asks if Omar can come and play, and his name is Chen. And he's a new immigrant from China. His family, he lives with his family in the Chinatown part of the city. And he calls up, and then when his mother is so thrilled, Muna says, "You have a friend, you have a friend." And he says, "Well, I'm not exactly a friend, but you know, you said that if anybody asked for my phone number, okay, I gave it to them." So she said, "Yes, yes, 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 we're gonna go over there. Tell them, yes, we're gonna go over." So on a Saturday, because she works Monday to Friday, they go over, and she goes to a new part of the city that she's never seen. And this is Chinatown, and she meets this Chang, and she meets his mother, Winnie. And Winnie is also a new immigrant, doesn't speak very much French at all, speaks Chinese. Turns out she was an accountant back where she came from. Her husband bought a dépanneur, and he works there most of the day and night. She has an older child also who works in the dépanneur when he's not in school, and Winnie is at home. So it's at that point where Omar has a friend, at least he got invited somewhere, and they have to speak French, these two little boys, because one speaks Arabic, one speaks Chinese at home, so the only language they have in common is the French that they're learning in school. But the mothers, Winnie, the mother, Chang's mother, invites her in, offers her this delicious meal, which she's so happy, because when things are really tight, they are reduced to eating samples of the weight loss meals that she can bring home, which are really not very good, and as a neighbor tells her, not very nutritious, you shouldn't be eating that stuff. And Winnie says to Muna, "Would you teach me French?" When she finds out that she speaks French and he's a French teacher. I will pay you $10 an hour. Please come every Saturday." And that $10, so first Muna says, "No, I wouldn't take it." She says, "No. And eventually Winnie invites all her other Chinese immigrants, like friends, they hear about this. And Muna has this French tutoring sideline on Saturdays that is bringing in extra money. And finally, towards the end, she becomes the top salesperson at the company. So what we think at the beginning is going to be a scam turns out to be a very encouraging and promising career. She's promoted to assistant manager. She has this tutoring business which outgrows the apartment in Chinatown and is now being held Saturdays in a church basement. And they are about winter, finally, this interminable, bitter, cruel, indescribable Montreal winter comes to an end. They find themselves a lovely new place that realizes she can afford, not far away, somewhere in the McGill ghetto, but in a beautiful old well-kept building. They are going to move. Her son will have his nice room. They will have a garden with a little backyard for him to play in, and things end on a very positive note. And at the very end, interestingly, because you say, like at the beginning when she gets the job and she's told, "Don't give your real name, so Muna, just become Mona," so they don't know, you never know your real name. And at the end of the book, the author ends and says, they're moving into the new place, and she has to sign a lease, and she has to come to the landlord with the first month's rent and the last month's rent, and she actually has it. She's got all this cash because of her Saturday tutoring job. And Mike, the landlord, takes them in. He opens the door and takes them into their empty new home. She gives him the envelope with the money, and he takes the envelope, doesn't even count it. Okie dokie, he says, "Now sign some papers. This is the lease. Here, initial, print your name, and it's all yours." She starts to sign it, and then she says, "I think hard before I move ahead with what I want to do. Delicately but fluidly, I sign my name as Mona Haddad. It's a minor change in an identity that no one will ever catch among all the rings and flourishes of my signature. It's mostly for me, but then I have to print it out at the end. There's nowhere to hide. And so out I come as Mona Haddad, like not Muna, I'm Mona, on this piece of paper that will probably never be looked at again. I set the pen down, and as Mona, I accept the keys. Then Mike leaves, and we're in our new apartment all alone." And she says, and they look, and her son is so excited, and they look at the balcony, and they look at the backyard, and they look at the view and the sunset, and they sit and over the mountain, because that's where they're facing. And she says, "I never once thought watching a sunset would be something I would want to do. Who has the courage to expect such moments when they only ever happen in TV movies? But now the bottom arc of the sun is about to touch the top of Mount Royal, and I know it's arbitrary that this will be our view from now on, but it still feels like it's happening, especially for me. I know that at least half the other balconies in this neighborhood face the very same way, and that there's nothing about this world that's bending over to please me in particular. But ya Allah, I still can't wait to see it. And that's how the book ends, on a very hopeful note. So I thought it was a wonderful description of this year, or almost a year, in the life of this new immigrant, single young woman, widow, and her son, and how they have to adapt to this new reality. And it's only, and you think, well, the way it sounds like things are can only go on for the better, and she's young, she's only 28 years old. And it was funny because in another interview, he says that Nasrallah said, when I was writing the book, I was a little nervous because in my other books, I had different voices. The first couple of them were mainly for me, like from a young man perspective. But here I was taking my mother's experience, I mean, mine too a little bit, but my mother's experience, and putting it there. So he said, I was very nervous. I gave my mother the book as a Christmas present, and the novel is dedicated to her. And he said, I didn't know what to expect. And then she called him up when she read it, and she said, I really enjoyed reading this. And I have to tell you, this is the first of your books where you don't sound like an angry young man. Like you finally grown up, Dimitri. And he said, I realized I finally grown up. And now that I'm in my 40s, and he said, I became a dad, I don't know how old this kid or kids are, but he says, I can understand my mother more, and I understand my parents and their experiences. So it took him, I guess, to writing this book to really come to terms, or decided he had come to terms with that he could write about this, that with sympathy and empathy for his parents' experience, whereas until that time, it was still him being an angry young man for, whatever happened to him and his unpleasant experience. But as I said, he seems to be doing quite fine. He's a lecturer at Concordia. He, for whatever reasons, moved back to Montreal, lives in the French-English environment by choice, is functioning in French, and now seems to have made himself quite a name with Hotline as one of Canada's readers' choices. So a hopeful, upbeat look at the immigrant experience in contemporary Montreal. Recommend. I didn't mean to. So any questions, anything?
I just think in general, it seems to me that this is sort of a universal experience for the immigrants in London.
Yeah.
They're all part of the gig. They all push and work hard and want their children to be successful.
And that's generally the field.
And I think
If they come with families, they're doing it for their children. If they have to give up whatever careers they had because they can't re-qualify, you're doing it for a future for your children. Or there's no choice, like you're gonna get killed, so, yeah.
Regarding the not being able to find a job.
Yeah.
I think at that point in time, unemployment here was about
It was
12,
bad,
13%
wasn't it? That mid-80s
unemployment.
was not a good time. I was trying to remember back, like,
And also, if I was told this, if you want to apply to the Catholic school board at that time.
you had to be Catholic.
Yeah. You had to,
Yeah.
it's like we were Catholics,
Right.
you don't know that, we just.
But I don't know, was 86, was it still Catholic approach, or were we French already? I don't remember when that switched over, because I knew you couldn't if you were Catholic. But then it became, no, now it's secular, laicité is the religion you put in, not Catholic, so I don't know. But so the way he makes it here was not a religious thing, he made it that, he didn't have the right accent, that they wouldn't want a Lebanese immigrant teaching.
Usually they ended up in the English.
Right, if they were, yeah. So I don't know if there was English and French.
I think by the time it was written, it was already the school board,
Well, the school-
Commission
English and
Scolaire
French.
and the English, yeah.
Yeah, right,
I think the Protestant Catholic was up till like the early 80s.
the early 80s, yeah, I know bad about dates, but yeah, because it was very clearly then. Yeah, I remember a friend of mine who was Protestant, I think she applied to teach and she didn't know that she came from, I don't know, Nova Scotia or something, and she said, they wouldn't let me because I wasn't Catholic, like, oh, I know Jews couldn't go to Catholic school, okay, that was a given, but then Protestants couldn't teach there, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I'm sure they didn't want any others.
Yeah, yeah,
And these,
Yeah.
I remember that winter, because I was moving.
oh, yeah, you remember,
Mid-January '87,
yeah,
and it was a massive blizzard. That the moving truck they couldn't shuttle out the moving truck in order to get the truck to my house on time, so they only got there like 4 hours late, because it was a massive blizzard.
it was that winter, so it was like, I guess, that was
I remember that winter being a massive blizzard. Multiple times.
Multiple
Snow was
times.
like.
Cause that, you know, she describes it and it's like some winters are not that bad, but I guess you yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then she describes an ice storm. There's another great scene where she's like, what is this? Okay, there's snow, there's blizzard, now there's this ice and sleet and she's never walked on ice. So, yeah.
Also, I had a winter coat, I had a little coat and simple logs, but you come here and you don't realize that there's
It's a whole new level.
I saw everybody else just enjoying the weather, and I was crying because I was so cold. You know, and my hands were frozen, and I couldn't understand why everybody else could manage.
And so you learned, you did not have what's the Swedish saying that we learned from, who did we do? Who's the Swedish writer with the bear town? Frederick
Bachman.
Bachman. Some Swedish saying that there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. I don't know. Maybe I have to be Swedish.
Well, people that I'm sorry, people that come from even not such warm climates. Like
Well, she's saying Philadelphia, that's not the Middle
I
East.
know people that like came from like London, England.
Yeah. No, it's a whole other level.
Like, they can't
No.
understand.
Yeah, it's a different level.
Well, I had relatives from London, England, they were staying with me. I don't know, I forget what, I don't know, it's within the last 20 years anyway. And it was a snowstorm, but it wasn't even really that cold. They were a couple. And we had met a big part of the family out in a restaurant for brunch on Sunday. And then we were invited to go somewhere for Sunday night. And when we got back home, we said, "Did we have to go out again?"
Yeah.
Stay home.
Yeah, it's something. All right, well, thank you very much. See you.
See you next month.
Thank you. He said I have nothing.